It was meant to be an ordinary Saturday morning. Grace Miller woke up early, planning to clean the house before the heavy rains arrived. She loved the feeling of freshness before the humidity came and made everything feel heavy. Rolling up her sleeves, she grabbed a rag and stood in front of the living room window, ready to begin. But before she could start, her phone buzzed in her pocket. When she looked, the name on the screen surprised her. Elena, her childhood friend whom she hadn't seen in years. Elena's cheerful voice filled the phone. "Grace, I'm in town just for today. Coffee? Please say yes." Grace hesitated. She looked around at the dusty shelves, the unwashed floor, the clutter she'd promised herself she'd fix that weekend. But the thought of seeing Elena again warmed her heart. They had shared so much growing up: summer fields, midnight talks, laughter under the stars. Grace couldn't say no. "Give me an hour," she said, smiling. Still, she didn't want to leave the house uncleaned. That's when she remembered Caroline, the polite college girl who lived down the alley and sometimes helped her neighbors with chores to pay her tuition. Grace called her and explained she needed help with a deep clean. Caroline accepted immediately, grateful for the job. Grace gave her clear instructions: focus on the library, scrub the stairs, and please be careful with my husband Daniel's old shelves. Caroline arrived soon after. Grace handed her the spare key and said, "Lock up when you're done, okay?" Then she grabbed her coat and left for the cafe garden where Elena was waiting. The reunion felt wonderful. They sat under a wide tree, laughing like old times. Elena talked about her life in the city and her grown children. Grace spoke about Daniel, a newspaper columnist, and her quiet days at home. It was simple, warm, and peaceful, until Grace's phone rang again. She glanced at the screen. "Caroline." Grace smiled, expecting to hear that the job was finished. Instead, the trembling voice on the other end froze her blood. "Mrs. Miller," Caroline whispered, breathing hard. "Is someone else in the house?" Grace frowned. "No, why do you ask?" "There's a woman on the second floor," Caroline said. "She's wearing a white dress, her hair's a mess. She just walked down the hall and disappeared into the last room." Grace's hand shook so badly, she nearly dropped the phone. "Caroline, get out right now. Go outside and wait for me." She grabbed her purse and ran to her car, apologizing breathlessly to Elena. Her hands trembled as she dialed the police on the drive home. "There's an intruder in my house," she said, trying to sound coherent. But fear made her voice crack. She called Caroline again and again, but there was no answer, only ringing. When she finally reached home, a patrol car was already parked in front. Caroline sat on the steps, pale and shaking. Grace ran to her. "Are you hurt? Did you see her again?" Caroline shook her head. "No, but I swear I saw her. She didn't look real." The officers searched every room, under beds, in closets, the shed, even the attic. There were no signs of forced entry. Everything was locked. The younger officer said quietly, "Ma'am, your house is clear." Grace nodded, but unease clung to her. Daniel's car pulled into the driveway just as the police were leaving. She rushed to tell him what happened, expecting alarm. Instead, Daniel chuckled softly. "Grace, our house is 70 years old. Shadows play tricks. The poor girl was probably just tired." He patted Caroline's shoulder kindly. Grace watched him, disturbed by his calmness. Caroline was no liar. She paid her and sent her home, but the doubt lingered. 3 months later, Grace retired from her job at the community center. No more early alarms, no more meetings, just quiet days in the old house. But peace never came. At night, she began hearing faint sounds from the attic, a chair scraping, soft footsteps, papers rustling. She tried to dismiss it as the wind, until one morning she confessed it to Daniel over breakfast. "I think someone's up there." Daniel didn't even look up from his newspaper. "It's rats, Grace. Old attics are full of them. I'll buy traps tomorrow." He did, and placed them neatly at the attic door. Strangely, the noises stopped completely afterward. For a few weeks, the house was silent again. Grace began to think he'd been right. But soon, other things began to go wrong, things she couldn't explain. One afternoon, She bought spicy sausage from the market, her favorite treat. Daniel hated spicy food. She wrapped it and stored it in the fridge. The next morning, half was gone. "Did you take some?" she asked. Daniel looked up.
Yeah.
"Thought I'd give it a try. Not bad." Grace froze. Daniel couldn't stand chili. He once got heartburn from mild curry. But she said nothing. A few days later, the sausage vanished entirely. She didn't confront him again, but suspicion rooted itself deep in her stomach. Then, one evening after they returned from visiting friends, she went upstairs to wash up and stopped dead. The bathroom floor was soaked, droplets still sliding down the tiles. "Daniel," she shouted. "Someone took a shower here." Daniel came up slowly, examined the puddles, and shrugged. "Must have been rain through the vent." Grace stared at him. "It hasn't rained." "Then it's a leak," he said flatly. "You worry too much." But he never called a plumber. The floor stayed dry afterward. Still, Grace couldn't shake the sense that someone, was living unseen within their walls. One quiet morning, Grace decided to tidy Daniel's library. Dust coated everything. As she lifted a pile of papers, a small drawer popped open. Inside was a worn brown notebook in delicate handwriting, a woman's script. The entries weren't diary notes, they were story drafts. Grace's heart pounded as she read a few lines, plots identical to Daniel's published novels. He never wrote by hand. Ever. She froze. The handwriting was unfamiliar yet graceful. A woman's imagination lay inside that leather cover. Poetic, vivid. And Daniel had used every story. Grace sat trembling, realizing the impossible. Her husband's fame was stolen. She hid the notebook back where she found it and pretended nothing happened. That night, she barely slept. Around 2 a.m., a soft creak from the hall made her sit up. The attic door was ajar. A cold draft drifted through the crack. Heart racing, she woke Daniel. "The attic door's open." He groaned, got up reluctantly, and walked down the hall. When they arrived, the latch was shut tight, as if untouched. Daniel sighed. "You're exhausted, Grace. Go to bed." She nodded weakly, but her doubts were multiplying like shadows. Days passed, and Daniel's habits grew stranger. He stayed up late, claiming to work on his manuscript. "Don't wait for me," he'd say softly, closing the library door. But one night, Grace woke at 1 a.m. and found a side of the bed cold. She tiptoed to the library. Empty. The computer was off, the chair perfectly in place. "Daniel," she whispered. No answer. She searched the kitchen, nothing. Just the moonlight glinting off the dishes. Then came a faint footstep from above. Grace looked toward the stairs. A figure was descending carefully. It was Daniel, barefoot, holding a dinner plate. When he saw her, his eyes widened. The plate slipped and shattered. Grace gasped. "What were you doing upstairs?" He crouched, picking up shards. "I couldn't sleep. Went up for quiet. Needed to think." The next morning, Daniel left early, unusually distant. Around noon, he appeared in a gray suit with a small suitcase. "I'm going north for a few days," he said flatly. Grace frowned. "Without notice?" He avoided her eyes. "I need inspiration. And Grace, don't let anyone from the newspaper in while I'm gone. If my editor, Mr. Carter, asks, tell him I'm away." His tone carried something darker than warning. 2 hours later, the doorbell rang. Grace peered through the peephole. Mr. Carter stood outside with a young assistant. She hesitated but opened the door. "Mrs. Miller," Carter said sharply, "where's Daniel?" "We need the manuscript." Grace repeated Daniel's words. "He's gone for inspiration." Carter scoffed. "Stop covering for him. Your neighbor says the attic light's on every night. He's obviously working here." Grace's blood ran cold. The attic light. After they left, she leaned against the door, trembling. Every piece of the puzzle pointed upward, to that dark, forbidden space. Determined, Grace fetched the old ladder from the shed, dragging it upstairs. Her hands shook as she unlatched the attic door. Hot, musty air rolled out. She climbed slowly, her phone light cutting through the dark. The attic was larger than she remembered, boxes, cobwebs, and old furniture everywhere. But in one corner was a small, organized space, a table, a lamp, and a frail woman hunched over a notebook. Grace froze. The woman's tangled white hair fell over a yellowed dress. The sound of a pencil scratching filled the silence. "Who's there?" Grace whispered. The woman turned. Her face, thin and ghostly pale, emerged from the lamplight, and Grace's knees buckled. "Marina," she breathed. Her long-lost sister, missing for 30 years, stared back at her. Grace stumbled forward, tears flooding her eyes. Marina trembled, trying to speak. "Sister, you found me." Grace pulled her into her arms. Her body felt fragile, bones pressing through thin skin. They went downstairs, each step unsteady. Grace gave her water, holding the glass for her trembling hands. When Marina could finally speak, her voice was hoarse. "I never meant to disappear. I killed Richard, my boss. He tried to force himself on me. It was self-defense. Daniel saw everything. He said he'd help me for your sake." Grace's mouth went dry. Marina's story spilled out. That night, Daniel buried Richard's body in the Santa Rosa Hills, then hid Marina in the attic for a few days. Those days became decades. He spread rumors that Marina had run away with Richard. Meanwhile, he discovered her writing and turned her stories into best-selling novels. Grace listened, horrified. Her husband's fame was built on her sister's imprisonment. "I wanted to confess," Marina said, crying softly, "but Daniel threatened me. He said you'd break if you knew. He said he was protecting you." Grace covered her face, shaking. "He stole your life," she whispered. "And I helped him without knowing." Marina reached for her hand. "You didn't know. I stayed to protect you." By dawn, Marina made a decision. "I can't hide anymore. I'll face the police." Grace begged her to rest, but Marina's eyes were clear. 30 years in darkness is enough. They drove to the station. When Marina confessed, officers listened in stunned silence. Her testimony reopened a long-closed case. Soon, remains were found in the hills, proof of Richard's death. An arrest warrant was issued. Daniel was caught that same evening, returning from his trip. He didn't resist. The news exploded, the ghost writer in the attic scandal. Grace watched it unfold, numb. She hired a lawyer for Marina, pleading for leniency. 30 years of captivity was punishment enough. But tragedy struck before justice could. Marina took her own life in her cell. The police delivered her letter to Grace. "Dear sister," it read, "for 30 years I wrote to survive, but now I'm free. My last story is Under the Attic Table. Let it be published under my name, Marina Delaney." Grace wept, clutching the letter to her chest. She promised to fulfill that wish. Months later, Marina's book was published under her real name. It became a phenomenon, hailed as a masterpiece. Daniel was convicted and sentenced. Grace turned the attic into a small library filled with her sister's works. Sometimes she stands there in the sunlight filtering through the window and whispers, "You're free now, Marina." And she finally understands. The truth may sleep for years, but it always wakes, strong enough to break every wall of silence.